Well, I must apologise for the wind and the birds. It's that type of morning, isn't it? Now, I'm going to revisit a subject today, which I'd like to revisit because I think it's critical and it shows the political bankruptcy of the major political parties in this country, especially the state government in Victoria. I want to talk about public housing, everybody's business, which is a campaign I've been involved with now for about 5 or 6 years. Now, before the last Victorian state election, we held a 10-day, 24-hour-a-day vigil on the steps of the Victorian Parliament House to highlight the issue of public housing. I stood as a candidate in the electorate of the then Housing Minister, Mr. Foley. And because of the pressure we were able to place on the government, because it was concerned about its re-election prospects, it made a promise to build 1,000 new public homes. New ones. Not one piece of paper has been organised, signed. Not one. Nothing has occurred regarding that promise. That promise has now been ditched, and the Victorian state government has continued to privatise public housing, to give over the public housing sector to the affordable social and community housing group, which are basically private organisations, some religious based, some not, some for profit, some not for profit. Doesn't really address the issue of public housing. And our campaign has been exceptionally simple. And the campaign is based on the concept of using stamp duty, which is a state tax which is levied on home buyers, that stamp duty be quarantined for public housing. And the dilemma is that we have had no traction whatsoever. We have become so marginalised that the issue of public housing is no longer an issue. It's interesting to see thousands of people in the streets of Melbourne protesting about their human rights, when the reality is there are no human rights enshrined in the Australian Constitution. But we don't see thousands of people protesting about what is a fundamental issue. A fundamental issue, having a roof over your head and not spending most of your income, whether it's rent or mortgage repayments, paying for a home. I mean, this is a fundamental issue. The issue people are currently protesting about will come and go and disappear. It will become an issue during the next pandemic. But the issue of housing continues. So why public housing? Not community housing, social housing, affordable housing, private housing. Currently, we have an overheated housing market, which is overheated for one very good reason. Low interest rates and a lack of competition in the housing market. There is no competition in the housing market. The housing market is dominated by private investors, whether for rent or to purchase. It's dominated by the private sector. As the public housing sector shrinks, the private housing sector becomes more powerful and prices increase, especially if interest rates are low. They may be low today, but they may not be low. They won't be low tomorrow. May not be, will not be low tomorrow. So what does public housing do? Now, public housing does a number of things. One, it increases security. It increases personal security, increases security for the community. The more people have a roof over their heads, the less crime. Very simple. A lot of crime, petty crime, occurs as a result of a lack of housing. Public housing also breaks the nexus between poverty and crime. There is a relationship between poverty and crime, and it's an intergenerational relationship which continues ad nauseum. Now, what public housing provides is stability. Stability in terms of the percentage of income required to pay for rent, and that's capped at 25% of your income. It's not about market prices, it's about 25% of your income. That's 1/4 of your income. When people are paying 40, 50, 60% of their income to repay a mortgage or to keep the roof over your heads, it has fundamental impacts on society. But let's get back to this, the security. The security of knowing you're not going to be moved on. The security of knowing that the landlord or landlady can come back at any time and take over that house, irrespective of whether you have a lease or not. The security of knowing that your children can go to the same school, develop the same friendship groups, and grow up in the same community, not having to relocate every 2 or 3 years to a different part of the city or the country in order to find affordable rents or affordable mortgages. So that's that security, and that security decreases crime and it increases general security. So if you're very rich and you're worried about being knocked over the head, so somebody steals your wallet or breaks into your home, well, this is one brilliant way of decreasing the crime in the community. The second thing is, it does something quite remarkable. It frees up income. And it does this in a variety of ways. Because when you've got a strong public housing sector, you've got competition in the marketplace. That's right, competition. The private market does not dominate the scene. If the private market does not dominate the scene, what that means is that rents will decrease, because as the public housing stock increases, the need to rent privately or the need to buy privately decreases, and as that decreases, that what puts downward pressure on housing prices. So as the public housing stock increases, not only do rents decrease, but also the price of properties at the lower end of the market, entry properties for young couples. That price decreases because most rental properties are basically designed for people at the lower end of the wage or the income stream. Now, if an investor is not going to get a return on that property, even although there's negative gearing laws to assist them, well, they're going to sell that property. And the more of those properties that come on the market, because of the increased public housing stock, the greater the pressure to decrease prices. At the same time, if more people live in public housing, there is less need for people to rent privately. That's the great Australian salute, see. There's more reason for people to rent. There's less reason for people to rent privately. That's an issue that's exceptionally important in 2020. With increasing housing prices and rental prices, and the fact that people are finding it more and more difficult, especially in regional areas, to pay for housing. Fundamentally, having no public housing means that most of people's disposable income goes into rent and mortgage. It means that the amount of disposable income for other living expenses decreases dramatically. That has a profound impact on the economy because people are not spending, because they don't actually have the money to spend. And what you need in a capitalist society, which is based on private investment and private growth, what you need is people to have disposable income. And to have all that income maybe 40% of the total income that comes into this country, that is produced by this country, to go towards rent and mortgages is ludicrous, because there's a downward impact on every other aspect of living. Downward impact on holidays, food, buying white goods, essentials, non-essentials, paying electricity bills, paying gas bills, paying school bills, and the list goes on and on. So having a strong public housing sector is a no-brainer. But what do we see? Especially in Victoria, the state I'm familiar with. What do we see? We see state governments running away from providing public housing, giving away their responsibility to the private sector. And the private sector is there, whether it's for profit or not for profit, to make money. It's there to expand empires. It's there to pay people who provide that service. It's there to cherry pick the easy people. The thing about public housing is there's no cherry picking. It's a little bit like a universal healthcare system. Who turns up at a public hospital, irrespective of who they are, gets treated. It's the same principle with public housing. Who's on the list eventually obtains housing. But the list in Victoria is now an emergency list. Nobody can get into public housing because of low income. They have to be facing some type of critical emergency to be able to enter the public housing waiting list. So it is a real difficult issue, and governments are running away from that issue. They refuse to address the issue because it goes against the current mantra to privatise, to globalise, to corporatise, deregulate. So what's the solution? Look, anybody can criticise, but what's the solution? And we have a very simple solution, an exceptionally simple solution. It doesn't take blood in the streets, it doesn't take protests. It's basically a simple legislative change. But it requires pressure from people. It requires constant pressure. That's what it requires, pressure. Political pressure on political parties to make this part of their parliamentary agenda. And if you look at the policies of the Liberal National Party and the Australian Labor Party in Victoria, they're all based around privatisation. So what's the simple solution? Because people say this is a complex problem. It requires complex solutions. Well, the solution is simple. If you levy a tax on home buyers, the money raised from that tax should be quarantined for public housing. Now, over the past financial year, about $6 billion, maybe $6.5 billion has been raised from stamp duty. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. And if that money is set aside for public housing, let's say $1 billion for ongoing costs and administration, say $5 billion to build new homes, and you don't have to build multi-storey condominiums or whatever. What you do is you use that money to spot purchase homes around the state. Melbourne, regional Victoria, and you can use the same policy in any other state in this country. The same policy. You could spot purchase with $5 billion almost 20,000 new homes every year. That's 20,000. That would accommodate anywhere between 80 to 100,000 people. every year. That means within a decade, 1 million people, about 15% of the population, would be in public housing, and in 2 decades you could actually have 30% of the population, that's in 20 years, in public housing. This would have a profound impact on the private housing market. It would benefit everybody, and that's why we claim that public housing is everybody's business. It would improve public security. It would decrease crime. It would decrease mental illness and psychiatric and anxiety related issues which have become a pandemic in this country. It would reduce rents for renters. It would reduce housing prices for first home buyers. It would no longer make housing an investment option. Housing would become what it should be. It's an option that people access in order to satisfy a fundamental human need. That's what public housing is about. Next year we will be restarting our Public Housing Everybody's Business campaign. We'll restart our vigils in 2022 outside the Victorian Parliament House. There's an election coming in Victoria at the end of November in 2022. It's time that public housing was put on the agenda. The leader of the Liberal opposition says he will repeal the current bill regarding the pandemics, but he says nothing about public housing. He will continue the privatisation agenda. The Greens, the Victorian Greens, have a public housing policy, and we also have a public housing policy, and it's essential, it's critical, not only essential but critical, that public housing continues to remain on the agenda in this state and this country, because it provides a solution to so many problems that are occurring in this society, problems which should not occur. They should not occur for 25 million people living on a resource-rich continent. If you're interested in pursuing these ideas, if you're interested in pursuing the concept of public housing, I encourage you to join Public Interests Before Corporate Interests. We require 550 members of the Victorian electoral roll in order to register the Victorian political party. We have a chance of doing this. We need about another 90 members. It's currently up to you. You know what to do. You can email us you can download an application form from pipsy.net. You can leave a message on 0439 395 489. Unless there are elements in society that are willing to push the public housing barrow, nothing will change. Rents will continue to increase, mortgages will continue to increase, public insecurity will continue to increase, the lives of hundreds of thousands of children in this state and this country will continue to be blighted because they don't have access to secure public housing. The ball is in your court. We can only do so much. We need your support and your help. We need you to join Public Interest Before Corporate Interests. It's essential that we register as a state-based party in Victoria to ensure that public housing once again becomes a significant issue in the community and during the 2022 election campaign in Victoria.